Imagine it. The quiet corridors of Windsor Castle, the ticking of a clock somewhere in the dark, and a sealed envelope marked with a single word, private. Inside it, the last words of the longest reigning monarch in British history. Words that would outlive her crown, her family, even her dynasty. And when that envelope was finally opened, 3 names were missing. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Andrew, Harry, Meghan. Why? That's the question that has haunted the palace and the world ever since whispers began to spread that Queen Elizabeth II's final will had finally been unveiled by King Charles. A will that did not follow royal tradition. A will that, if the reports are true, sent shockwaves through the monarchy. But the real story isn't just who was left out. It's why. Because behind those golden gates, loyalty and betrayal often share the same tea table. The royal family has always been a house built on silence. But silence, as we're about to see, can be its own kind of confession. The Queen's passing in September 2022 was meant to mark an ending, a chapter closed with dignity, grace, and continuity. Britain mourned, the world grieved, and her eldest son stepped into history as King Charles III. The crown passed peacefully. The nation carried on. That's what we saw. What we didn't see were the quiet meetings, the closed-door conversations, and the final decisions made by a woman who'd spent her entire life balancing love and duty, until the scales finally tipped. Because if there's one truth about monarchs, it's this: they don't make mistakes in their final moments. Every gesture, every word, every silence, it all means something. But what did it mean when 3 of the most controversial names in royal history vanished from her last will? To understand that, we have to go back, not to the beginning of her reign, but to the final years of it. The years when her family fractured in public, when the tabloids feasted, when scandal collided with tradition, and when, for the first time, Elizabeth II faced a crisis not as a queen, but as a mother, a grandmother, and a woman who knew the end was near. It's easy to imagine the Queen as stoic and untouchable, the immovable symbol of Britain itself. But those who were there say that in her final months, something in her changed. The death of Prince Philip had left her lonelier than she ever admitted. Her once iron routine softened. The long walks at Balmoral grew shorter. Her laughter, once quick and bright, came less often. And yet, beneath that frailty, something else stirred: resolve. You see, the Queen had seen this story before. Heirs arguing, reputations crumbling, public trust eroding. She knew what happens when royal families implode. She'd spent a lifetime managing the image of unity, even when it didn't exist. But in those final months, with her health fading and her legacy on the line, she stopped thinking about image. She started thinking about history. And that's when she began to ask one question, again and again: who will protect the crown when I'm gone? It wasn't Charles she doubted, though their relationship had always been complex. It wasn't William. He was the future. It was the others, the ones who had either disgraced, distanced, or defied the institution she'd sworn to uphold. Andrew, whose scandals had dragged the monarchy into courtrooms and headlines no royal should ever see. Harry, the grandson who'd once been her pride and joy, but who turned his back on the system she lived for. And Meghan, the modern outsider who captured global fascination, then global fury, and left the palace in flames. 3 names. 3 symbols of what the Queen saw as the monarchy's greatest modern threats: shame, division, and disobedience. But the story isn't that simple, is it? Because love complicates everything. Even queens can't escape that. The Queen's aides recall her looking out a window one evening at Balmoral and saying softly, "I've seen it all, but I never imagined this." Those around her knew she wasn't speaking about the public or the press. She was speaking about her own family, the betrayals that had unfolded before her eyes, the quiet heartbreak of watching the House of Windsor. Her life's work, splinter in real time. She'd held the family together for 70 years. And now, for the first time, she began to consider what would happen when she couldn't hold it anymore. That's where the will came in. Traditionally, royal wills are sealed, locked away for at least 90 years. The public never sees them. But this one was different. Because even though it was sealed, those who knew its contents could feel the shift. The Queen, sources say, had left behind more than instructions. She had left behind judgment. Her final act wasn't about money. though billions in assets hung in the balance. It wasn't about property or jewels or titles. It was about control, about shaping the monarchy's narrative one last time from beyond the grave. And to do that, she made a decision that no royal matriarch before her had dared to make. She cut her own family out. Now, you might be wondering, could the queen really have done that? Could she have gone against royal protocol, her own nature, her own blood? The short answer, yes. Because by the end, Elizabeth II was not just a monarch. She was a survivor, and survivors know when to sever the rope before the ship sinks. But what drove her to that point? Was it anger? Betrayal? Or something colder, something strategic? That's where King Charles enters this story, not as the dutiful son we saw on the balcony at his mother's funeral, but as the executor of her final will. The man tasked with unveiling a truth so shocking that even his closest advisors urged caution. Because once this document was unsealed, there would be no turning back. Imagine being in that room, the heavy drapes drawn, the legal advisors seated, the air thick with tension. A lifetime of monarchy distilled into a few lines on parchment. And there, in perfect handwriting, the Queen's signature, underlined, deliberate, final. When Charles read it, one witness said, he went pale. Another said, he didn't speak for several minutes. Whatever he saw on that page, it changed the balance of power inside the royal family forever. And when the news broke that 3 key figures had been removed from the Queen's inheritance, the palace went into lockdown. Phones confiscated. Staff warned. The message was clear. This never leaves the room. Except it did, because secrets in the royal world never stay buried. They leak through whispers, through journalists, through the small betrayals that happen when loyalty meets guilt. And soon, details began to surface, of assets redistributed, of names redacted, of legal clauses that seemed to target 3 specific individuals. The question wasn't whether Andrew, Harry, and Meghan had been excluded. It was why the Queen wanted it that way. Was it punishment? Protection? Or perhaps, her way of preserving the monarchy's image one final time? Even if it meant sacrificing her own blood? Whatever the reason, one thing was certain. This wasn't an accident. The Queen's will wasn't just a legal document. It was a message to the nation, to her family, and to history itself. And that message was clear. The crown must endure, even if the family does not. But the deeper story, the one hidden behind the official statements and the palace denials, begins long before the ink dried on that will. It begins in those final years when the Queen's perception of her family began to shift, when scandals eroded her trust, when loyalties fractured quietly in drawing rooms and phone calls. It begins with the Queen herself, sitting alone at Windsor, surrounded by portraits of her ancestors, and realizing that her family might destroy everything she had spent her life preserving. So she made a decision. If she could not save them all, she would save the monarchy. And that's when she began rewriting her will. Piece by piece, clause by clause, late at night, reviewing documents, asking questions no one expected her to ask. What happens if a royal renounces duty? Can titles be revoked after death? What defines service to the crown in legal terms? Her advisors were stunned. The Queen, ever cautious, ever diplomatic, had turned strategist. But not everyone around her agreed with her choices. Some thought she was being manipulated. Others feared that her actions would tear the family apart. But she didn't waver. In her own words, according to one confidant, she said, "This is not about them. It's about what comes after." And when you hear that line, it hits differently. Because maybe the Queen didn't cut Andrew, Harry, and Meghan out of cruelty. Maybe she did it out of necessity, to preserve the institution she saw as bigger than any single life, even her own family's. But whether you see it as justice or heartbreak, one fact remains. Her decision lit a fuse that would soon explode across the royal world. Because when Charles opened that will, he didn't just inherit a throne, he inherited a war. And it's a war that's still being fought, quietly, behind palace walls, where reputation is currency and truth is dangerous. So, as we open this story, the story of how the Queen's will became the monarchy's greatest scandal, remember this. Every royal secret starts as a whisper. Every whisper has a source. And sometimes, the truth doesn't destroy power, it defines it. Because what the Queen left behind wasn't just a document. It was a warning. What really happens when a monarch starts to fade? when the world still bows, but behind closed doors, she's just a frail woman watching her empire fracture. This is where the real story begins, in the Queen's twilight years. The years when the cameras caught her smile, but not the strain behind it. The years when her pen began to move differently, slower, heavier, more deliberate. Because by then, Elizabeth II was no longer ruling a nation. She was preparing for history's judgment. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? A woman who'd survived wars, scandals, abdications, and divorces, suddenly faced with something she couldn't control, her own family. The House of Windsor wasn't just divided. It was cracking at its foundations. And those cracks, invisible at first, had begun to spread in all directions. Her doctors called them quiet years, but in reality, they were anything but quiet. Those closest to her would later whisper that the Queen spent more time looking back than forward. She reread old letters from her father, King George VI. She watched black and white newsreels of her coronation. She'd even keep Philip's old spectacles on her writing desk, untouched since the day he died. Every detail mattered to her, because memory, to the Queen, was power, and she knew she didn't have much time left to use it. But what triggered her shift from passive monarch to silent strategist? According to one longtime aide, it began in 2021, the year after Philip's passing. The family, still reeling from his loss, found itself dragged into another firestorm, the Oprah interview. Harry and Meghan's explosive revelations about the firm, racism, and isolation inside palace walls had shaken the monarchy's global image. The Queen didn't respond with anger, at least not publicly. Her statement, simple and carefully worded, said it all. Recollections may vary. But behind that polite line, there was hurt and confusion. She'd always loved Harry. Always. The red-headed boy who chased corgis through the halls, who made her laugh at state dinners, who once whispered, "Granny, you're not really the Queen, right?" Now, that same boy had accused her institution of cruelty and silence. To the public, the Queen remained unflappable. Inside Windsor, she was heartbroken. And yet, she didn't act impulsively. She never did. Her nature was to observe, to weigh, to understand. So she watched. She studied her family's reactions. Charles, defensive and cautious. William, cold and resolute. And quietly pragmatic. And Andrew, well, Andrew was another matter entirely. While one son faced public disgrace, another faced private turmoil. The monarchy's image, her life's work, was being chipped away piece by piece. To most, these were modern scandals. To Elizabeth, they were echoes of something older, something she'd seen before, the erosion of respect for the throne. It reminded her of the 1930s, of her uncle, King Edward VIII, who'd abdicated for love and thrown the monarchy into chaos. She'd watched her father crumble under the weight of that decision. And now, almost a century later, she saw history repeating itself, this time through her own bloodline. But unlike her father, she wouldn't let the next generation face the same humiliation. Not if she could stop it. That's when she started to change. Her private secretaries noticed it first. She began asking uncharacteristic questions about inheritance structures, succession rules, even legal definitions of service. One aide reportedly asked, "Your Majesty, is this for the archives?" Her answer was calm, almost cold. "It's for clarity." She'd begun mapping her family's legacies, not as grandmotherly affection, but as sovereign duty. By that autumn, palace insiders spoke of what they called the Windsor Papers, a private collection of notes, observations, and handwritten memos the Queen kept in a small leather folder. In it, she tracked every scandal, every misstep, every broken promise. Not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Because as she told her closest confidant, "History will not be kind if I am not precise." But the Queen wasn't just recording. She was deciding. In the evenings, she'd sit by the fire with her dogs at her feet and review old photographs. Her eyes would linger on certain faces. Philip, Margaret, Diana, and then, inevitably, Harry and Meghan. Some nights, she'd laugh softly. Other nights, she'd sigh and whisper to no one. They were never meant for this. Those who served her said she seemed both serene and haunted, like a woman making peace with the inevitable. But make no mistake, Elizabeth II never surrendered to emotion. She turned it into strategy. Her mindset shifted from "what have I lost" to "what can I still protect?" And that's where the will came into play. The Queen knew her time was limited. The doctors told her privately that her heart was weakening, her energy dwindling. Still, she refused to stop working. She continued to read daily government dispatches, sign legislation, and host audiences. But behind the public schedule, something else was happening. She began summoning her most trusted advisors, one by one. There was Sir Edward Young, her private secretary, Lord Geit, her former chief aide, and a quiet legal consultant who had served the crown for decades. Their meetings weren't listed on official schedules. No press releases. No witnesses except the note-takers. And the discussions? They were about one subject, her succession plan, and her personal estate. At first, no one suspected that the Queen's will was being rewritten. It was assumed she was simply updating old documents, ensuring everything was in order. But then, the tone of her questions changed. She asked, what if a royal departs public service? Does that alter entitlement? Can an heir's privileges be rescinded posthumously? And most telling of all, how long must a sealed will remain sealed? That last question startled even her lawyers. Because by royal protocol, the wills of monarchs are sealed for 90 years, hidden from the public eye. The Queen herself had upheld that secrecy for decades. Yet now, she was challenging it. Some truths, she said quietly, should not wait a century. Those around her didn't yet grasp what she meant, but they would soon enough. At night, when Windsor Castle was silent, the Queen would walk the halls alone. Sometimes she paused at Philip's portrait, other times at the window overlooking the gardens. One footman recalled seeing her there, murmuring softly, "I've given them everything." It was not self-pity. It was realization. The monarchy she had preserved for 70 years had become something she barely recognized, a stage for scandals and rivalries she could no longer contain. And so, she began to write. Not letters, not speeches, but personal reflections. Thoughts about each family member, written in her own hand, folded neatly, and stored in that same leather folder. When aides asked what they were, she'd only smile and say, "My insurance." But insurance wasn't quite the right word. They were instructions, directives, and one day, they would be read aloud to her heir. What few knew then was that her private reflections were being incorporated into her official estate planning. Every word, every judgment, every omission, deliberate. The Queen was drafting not just a will, but a verdict. Still, part of her wrestled with it. Cutting out family, even problematic ones, went against her nature. She believed in forgiveness, in dignity, in quiet restraint. But she also believed in accountability. Her life had been built on the notion that the crown must come before the individual. And in those final years, she decided that even her family was no exception. Some of her closest friends noticed her demeanor harden whenever the subject of Andrew arose. The scandal surrounding his alleged misconduct and legal settlements had humiliated her deeply. "He was always my darling boy," she'd once said. But by 2022, that affection was laced with disappointment. One insider recalled her saying, "It's one thing to make mistakes. It's another to make the crown pay for them." And yet, she continued to protect him publicly. The quiet contradiction of a mother and monarch battling within the same person. It was that same duality that shaped her decisions on Harry and Meghan as well. The human part of her loved them. The royal part of her saw danger. The modern couple had broken royal tradition in ways she couldn't ignore, not by divorcing or scandal, but by telling the world how the palace really worked. To her, that was unforgivable. And so, her will became the battlefield between her heart and her crown. Her advisors said she took months to finalize even a single clause. She'd review drafts line by line, making small notes in pencil. Sometimes she'd write a check mark beside a name. Sometimes she'd draw a simple X. No one dared to ask what those marks meant. But they all understood. They were decisions. Permanent ones. By the summer of 2022, the Queen's health had visibly declined. Public appearances grew fewer. Her steps became shorter, her voice softer. But her mind remained razor-sharp. Those closest to her said she seemed almost peaceful, as though she had already made her choices and accepted their consequences. One evening, she hosted a small dinner with Charles and William at Windsor. It was quiet, restrained, but telling. According to an insider, she spoke about responsibility and continuity, and said to them both, "When I am gone, you must not waver." Charles nodded. William looked solemn. Neither fully understood that she wasn't just speaking about the throne. She was speaking about her will. The next morning, she made one final addition to the document. A handwritten note sealed in a separate envelope, attached to the front page. Its contents remain a mystery, but one palace staffer claimed the note began with 5 chilling words. If you are reading this. By early September, the Queen's condition worsened. Her physicians urged rest. She refused. She continued to read daily briefings and meet officials. Her last formal engagement was with Liz Truss, the new prime minister. The photographs from that day show her smiling. Fragile, yes, but radiant. Yet those who knew her best say something else. That smile had closure. Because just hours before that meeting, she had signed her final will. 2 days later, she was gone. And just like that, Britain's greatest constant became a memory. For weeks afterward, the palace was consumed by mourning. But behind the scenes, something else stirred. Quiet legal discussions. Document transfers. Sealed files moved from Windsor to Buckingham Palace under armed escort. Charles, now king, began receiving briefings on his mother's private estate. And somewhere among those papers, deep in the royal vault, lay the will. The one document that could reshape the monarchy's future. But before it could be revealed, one final twist would emerge. Because the Queen, it seems, hadn't trusted just one person to carry out her wishes. She'd entrusted 2. And that decision would set the stage for the first real royal confrontation of Charles's reign. It started with a whisper, the kind of whisper that could topple crowns. Late one evening in Windsor Castle, long after the mourning bands had been removed and the black bunting packed away, a message was hand-delivered to King Charles. A single line written in the Queen's unmistakable cursive, "See Edward Young. The matter is unfinished." No signature, no date, just that. To anyone else, it might have seemed like an old note. But Charles knew his mother's handwriting too well. The phrasing, formal, restrained, told him everything. This wasn't sentimental. It was a directive. And the matter? It could only mean one thing. The Queen's will. For days, the new king avoided addressing it. There were ceremonies to plan, statements to issue, portraits to commission. But the thought nagged at him, unfinished business. His mother had tied every loose end of her reign with surgical precision. If something was left unresolved, it was because she wanted it unresolved. Finally, on a gray Tuesday morning, Charles summoned Sir Edward Young, the man who had been at the Queen's side longer than most of her children. The meeting took place in a small study, not the grand chambers the public imagines. No aides, no press secretaries. Just 2 men, 1 teapot, and a silence that could have been cut with a knife. Edward, loyal to the last, carried with him a slim red folder sealed with a black ribbon. He placed it on the desk and waited. Charles didn't touch it. "What is it?" the king asked. Edward hesitated. "Her Majesty instructed that this be presented to you privately." She requested discretion. Discretion from whom? Edward's eyes didn't move. "From everyone, sir." Charles stared at the folder. He'd been waiting for it, and dreading it, in equal measure. Because inside, he suspected, lay his mother's final judgment. Not on her country, not on her people, but on her family. On his family. He finally broke the seal. Inside were 3 documents. The first, a letter, dated only weeks before her death. The second, a memorandum from her legal counsel. The third, a handwritten list. Names, notes, amendments. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. The Queen had always been meticulous. But as Charles read deeper, his breath caught. One line stood out, stark and cold. Regarding Andrew, Henry, and Meghan, remove direct entitlements. Maintain discretion. It was written in the Queen's own hand. No explanation, no justification. Just a royal command. Charles set the paper down slowly. She meant this to be enacted? Edward nodded. She was insistent, particularly after the Balmoral Conference. That name made Charles look up. The conference? Edward hesitated again. Your Majesty, she asked that you not be burdened with details. Only outcomes. But Charles wasn't his mother. He had lived too long in the shadows of her decisions. He wanted details. He wanted the truth. Tell me everything. And so Edward did. He described the final months before her death, meetings at Balmoral, all held in secret. Present were the Queen, her private counsel, and 2 advisors whose names never appeared on the official record. No aides, no equerries, no family. The topic? The future of the monarchy's private estate. It was there, Edward said, that the Queen made her decision to amend her will one last time. She viewed it as an act of protection, Edward explained. Her Majesty feared that the crown's stability could be compromised by ongoing distractions. Distractions, Charles repeated, the word heavy with irony. She believed that certain members had chosen paths incompatible with royal service. She didn't wish her estate to fund those choices. Charles leaned back in silence. He'd expected something like this. His mother had hinted at her growing frustration in her final year. But seeing it written down, final and binding, was something else. And she never told me? Edward lowered his voice. She believed it would spare you, sir. Until the time came. Charles looked down at his mother's handwriting again. Neat, unwavering, deliberate. Even in her final months, her control had been absolute. He should have felt pride. Instead, he felt something else, fear. Because this wasn't just a private will. It was a royal message, encoded in legal form. A message that, if revealed, could ignite a family war and a media inferno. Does anyone else know of this? Charles asked. Edward shook his head. Only those present at Balmoral. And now you. For a long time, neither man spoke. Outside, the castle bells told the hour. Somewhere in the distance, a corgi barked, a strange echo of a vanished era. Finally, Charles closed the folder. Then we proceed as she wished. But even as he said it, doubt flickered across his face. He'd spent his entire life preparing to be king, to continue her legacy, to preserve the monarchy's image. But now, that legacy demanded a sacrifice, one that could divide his family forever. Was that really what his mother wanted? Or had she been influenced? Because there were rumors, quiet ones, whispered in corridors and gardens. Rumors that the Queen's final months hadn't been as tranquil as the palace had claimed, that her inner circle had grown smaller. That one advisor in particular had her ear more than anyone else. And that advisor, some said, had an agenda. Charles tried to dismiss it. His mother had been sharp until the very end. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. If she had been guided or misled, then her will wasn't just her legacy. It was someone else's manipulation. Over the next week, Charles summoned others who had been present at Balmoral. Each gave the same story. The Queen was lucid, determined, unwavering. But their accounts didn't match on one thing. Who first proposed the exclusion clause? Some said it was her idea. Others said it was suggested. Suggested by whom? No one could agree. Or perhaps, no one dared. As the days passed, Charles grew restless. Every decision he made as king was shadowed by that folder, and the question it raised. Should he honor it as written? Or should he protect the family from itself? He began to realize that whatever choice he made, the consequences would be catastrophic. If he obeyed the Queen's will, the monarchy would appear cold and divided. If he altered it, he'd betray her dying wish and risk the appearance of cover-up. For a man who had spent a lifetime chasing approval, it was a cruel inheritance. Meanwhile, whispers began to reach the press. Not details, not yet, but hints. Journalists spoke of unusual changes in the royal estate. Rumors that certain family members had been excluded from future trusts. Unsubstantiated, the palace said. But behind closed doors, everyone knew. Someone had talked. Charles ordered silence. But he was too late. The leak had begun, and the first to hear of it, ironically, was Andrew. According to an insider, Andrew stormed into a private audience demanding answers. Is it true, he asked. Has Mummy cut me out? Charles refused to comment, but the look on his face said enough. Andrew left furious, muttering about betrayal and injustice. That same night, he called Harry, their first private conversation in years. No one knows exactly what was said, but within days, Harry and Meghan's PR team began issuing strangely pointed statements about respecting family privacy. Coincidence? Perhaps not. The leak was out, and the palace couldn't contain it. But Charles still didn't know the full truth. Not yet. Because there was one more thing hidden in that red folder. A name he hadn't noticed at first. A witness signature, small and almost illegible, scribbled at the bottom of the Queen's memorandum. It wasn't one of her usual advisors. Not a lawyer. Not an aide. It was someone else. Someone from inside the family. Charles's eyes widened when he finally recognized it. The witness was Princess Anne. The realization hit him like a blow. His sister, the one he trusted most, had been part of the Balmoral meeting. and she hadn't told him. Why? That question would haunt him for days. Until finally, one evening at Sandringham, he confronted her and didn't deny it. Yes, she said simply. I was there. You knew about the exclusions? I did. And you said nothing? She looked at him, steady, unflinching. Because it was Mother's wish. She asked me to ensure it was done. Charles felt the room spin. You ensured it? Anne's voice didn't waver. She wanted peace, Charles. You of all people should understand that. Some things had to be settled before she went. And if you loved her, you'll leave it as she left it. Those words stung. But worse than the sting was the implication that Anne had been her confidant in those final decisions. That she, not Charles, had been the Queen's chosen keeper of truth. When she left the room, he sat alone, staring at the folder once more. His mother's handwriting, his sister's signature, his own uncertainty. And in that moment, he realized something chilling. The Queen hadn't just left him her throne. She'd left him a test. One that would force him to choose between family and duty, between peace and exposure, between being a son and being a king. And as he poured himself a drink, the thought struck him like thunder. Maybe this wasn't unfinished business after all. Maybe this was exactly how she planned it. Because the Queen's last lesson, her final exercise of power, wasn't written in law or legacy. It was written in silence. And the silence was about to break. It began as a signature, elegant, poised, unmistakably hers. But what if it wasn't? What if the Queen's final will, the document meant to define her legacy and protect her family, had been shaped, or even rewritten, by someone else? That question didn't come from the tabloids. It came from inside the palace walls. In the weeks following the revelation of the will, subtle inconsistencies began to surface. Dates that didn't match official records. Phrases that sounded nothing like the Queen's formal style. Handwritten annotations in a pen she hadn't used in years. To the untrained eye, they meant nothing. But to those who knew her, her private secretaries, her archivists, even her longtime dresser, they were anomalies. And anomalies, in the royal household, are never accidental. The Queen was precise to the point of obsession. Every comma mattered, every clause weighed. For her will, her final word, to contain even minor discrepancies was unthinkable. So the whispers began. Who really wrote the Queen's will? Some pointed to Sir Edward Young, her private secretary. Others to her trusted legal advisor, Lord Guyte, before his departure. But a smaller, quieter circle believed something far more unsettling. That in her final year, the Queen's control had slipped. That others had begun to speak for her. Charles couldn't shake that thought. One night, alone in his study, he compared two versions of the same document. The draft the Queen had reportedly reviewed, and the final, sealed copy presented after her death. To his astonishment, subtle differences appeared. A phrase removed here. A clause adjusted there. Nothing dramatic, but the meaning shifted just enough to alter the fate of 3 family members. And in the margins, faintly visible under angled light, a pencil notation, confirmed by EY+A. EY, Edward Young. Anne. The same 2 names that had haunted him since Balmoral. Could they have made amendments after her approval? Or had she instructed them to do so? The ambiguity was maddening. The deeper Charles looked, the murkier it became. According to palace protocol, any royal will undergoes at least 3 witness reviews before sealing. Yet 2 of those witnesses were missing from the record. Their names, replaced by initials. Their signatures, blurred by a second layer of ink. The official story claimed a clerical error. But Charles, ever the archivist, knew better. The monarchy does not make clerical errors. So he began to dig. He ordered a quiet audit of all late-stage documents signed by his mother in her final 6 months, speeches, correspondences, even Christmas messages. The results were chilling. Patterns emerged. Repetitions. Identical phrasing used across different letters supposedly written weeks apart. The same odd formality, as has been my custom, repeated in letters that had always varied in tone. It was as if someone had been writing for her. And then came the revelation that stopped him cold. Buried in the metadata of one draft, a scanned copy uploaded to the Royal Archives, was a digital trace. The editing had been done not from Windsor or Balmoral, but from Clarence House. His own former office. The user ID? EY/Ops3. Edward Young's terminal. That night, Charles called him in. Edward arrived as composed as ever, his expression unreadable. The two men sat in the same study where the red folder had first been opened. Charles began without preamble. "Why does the will show revisions from your office?" Edward didn't flinch. "Her Majesty reviewed drafts wherever convenient. Some adjustments were typed here for expediency. Without her presence?" Edward paused, choosing his words carefully. "Under her instruction, sir." Charles leaned forward, and the annotations in her hand. She often dictated for expediency as well. Her health made writing difficult toward the end. It sounded reasonable, too reasonable. But Charles had seen his mother only weeks before she passed. Her hand was frail but steady, her mind sharp. The idea that she'd delegated her final will, the most personal act of her reign, didn't ring true. He pressed further. "And these exclusions, Andrew, Harry, Meghan, did she dictate those too?" Edward's gaze didn't waver. "She approved every word." But that wasn't an answer. Approval wasn't authorship. The king dismissed him, but the conversation left a crack, a small one, in the wall of loyalty that had surrounded the queen all her life. If Edward had overseen the document's preparation, he'd have had near total control over its language. And with Anne's signature as witness, the will's authenticity would appear beyond question. But was it beyond manipulation? Enter the hidden hand. Insiders later described an unnamed advisor who became increasingly involved in the queen's private affairs during her last year. Not a royal relative, not a statesman, a legal intermediary, discreet, ambitious, and fiercely loyal to the institution, not the individuals within it. This advisor reportedly worked closely with Edward and during the Balmoral meetings. Their role, officially, was to streamline estate transitions. Unofficially, they were seen as a fixer, someone who made uncomfortable matters disappear. And what could be more uncomfortable than the queen's grandchildren tearing at the seams of the monarchy she'd spent a lifetime preserving? That's when the theory took shape. The exclusions weren't about punishment. They were about containment. Andrew's scandals, Harry and Meghan's defiance, all had brought turbulence to the crown. By cutting them from direct entitlements, the institution insulated itself. It was a firewall, disguised as a mother's decision. But who built that firewall? A former staffer later recalled something chilling. A week before the Queen's final hospitalization, Edward Young had reportedly received a private envelope marked QEII, final. It contained handwritten revisions, or what appeared to be. But the handwriting, when compared side by side with older documents, didn't match perfectly. It was close. Too close. Almost traced. Could someone have forged even a small part of the Queen's notes? It seemed unthinkable, treasonous, even. Yet palace insiders quietly acknowledged that in the haze of her declining months, multiple helpers assisted with correspondence. Notes were typed, printed, copied, re-signed. The line between her pen and their edits blurred. In that fog of delegation, authenticity became elastic. Charles found himself tormented by a single thought. If the Queen's will had been shaped by others, then her voice, the voice of the crown itself, might have been partially silenced before her death. He needed proof. So he turned to the only person who might still have it, the royal archivist, Sir Malcolm Denham, a man whose memory stretched back half a century. Denham had catalogued every royal document since the days of Churchill. He agreed to meet Charles in secret, under the pretense of reviewing coronation records. After an hour of routine conversation, Charles finally asked, "Tell me the truth. Who finalized my mother's will?" Denham sighed. "Officially, Her Majesty." Unofficially, he trailed off. "Go on." "She was tired, sir. Very tired. In those final weeks, she left much in the hands of others. Edward, of course. And Lady X." Charles frowned. "Lady X." Denham hesitated. A legal attaché brought in from the duchy office. Quiet woman. Efficient. Rarely spoke. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a photocopy, a draft of the Queen's estate memorandum, dated 2 months before her passing. At the bottom was an unfamiliar signature. Lady Isabel Cunningham. A name Charles had never heard. She handled revisions, Denham said softly. Her Majesty trusted her judgment. She was persuasive. Where is she now? Gone, sir. Resigned shortly after the funeral. No forwarding address. Charles stared at the page. The realization dawned slowly, painfully. A stranger had helped shape his mother's final will. A woman who had vanished without trace. The hidden hand wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. a hand that had written, amended, and possibly directed history itself. And yet, why would an allow it? That question gnawed at him more than any other. His sister was incorruptible, blunt, honest, immune to flattery. If she'd sanctioned this mysterious figure's involvement, there had to be a reason. He confronted her again, this time more directly. Who was Lady Cunningham? He demanded. Anne's reaction was immediate and chilling. Her eyes flashed. You've been digging. I deserve to know who had Mother's ear. She was necessary, and said curtly. Mother trusted her. She understood the delicacy of things. What delicacy? Anne's jaw tightened. The future, Charles. You think being king is about sentiment, but it's about survival. Mother knew that. So she let others decide for her. She let others protect her. There's a difference. The conversation ended there, but the damage was done. Charles left more uncertain than ever. The Queen's will, once a symbol of finality, had become a maze of ghosts, initials, and invisible hands. And just as he began to piece together the threads, a new storm hit. One tabloid, citing insider sources, broke the story of a mystery advisor involved in the Queen's final affairs. They didn't name names, not yet, but the implication was explosive. The Queen's last will had been influenced, perhaps even rewritten, by someone outside the family. The palace issued denials. The King's office stayed silent. But in private, Charles knew the leak had come from within, which meant only one thing. Someone close to him wanted the truth, or their version of it, out. The will was no longer just a family matter. It was becoming a weapon. And as the headlines multiplied, so did the questions. Had the Queen truly signed her last will with full intent? Or had the monarchy's final matriarch been outmaneuvered by the very institution she built to endure? Charles didn't have the answer, but he knew where to find it. Because somewhere, hidden in the royal archives, was the original draft, the untouched version, the one written before Edward Young or Lady Cunningham ever laid eyes on it. And when that document surfaced, everything, his mother's legacy, his reign, his family's future, would hang in the balance. But finding it wouldn't be easy. The corridors of Windsor had always seemed endless, echoing the weight of centuries. But beneath the gilded walls, behind tapestries that hid more than they revealed, there was a vault, a place few had seen, fewer still remembered. It was here that the deepest secrets of the royal family were kept. Letters, ledgers, portraits, and documents older than any living member of the dynasty. King Alaric, newly crowned after the death of Queen Eleanor, had heard whispers of the vault, tales passed down through aides and archivists, that it contained truths the world was never meant to see, truths that could topple the monarchy if exposed. Most dismissed them as legend. Alaric did not. He had the Queen's last will in his hands, the one that had already shaken the family to its core. But as he studied it, doubts gnawed at him. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, flawless, but something felt off. Too perfect, too precise, almost as if it had been written by someone who knew exactly what the words needed to accomplish. The thought had been haunting him for weeks. What if this wasn't entirely Eleanor's work? What if someone else had had a hand in shaping her final decree, guiding it, even manipulating it? He had one lead, the vault. No one spoke of the vault openly. The servants walked past its entrance daily without a thought. But Alaric knew the truth. The vault was not just storage. It was a crucible, a repository for the dynasty's history, power, and, occasionally, its sins. Late one evening, after the household had gone quiet, Alaric summoned his closest confidant, Lord Harrington, and together they descended the narrow staircase that led beneath the castle. The air grew colder, damper, and the walls tighter. The flickering torchlight revealed carved stone arches, inscriptions, and a weighty door at the far end, secured by a brass lock polished by generations of caretakers. This, Alaric whispered, is where the truth lives. Harrington nodded, unease in his eyes. Few have seen it in decades, Your Majesty, and fewer leave it unchanged. Alaric inserted the old skeleton key his mother had once used in emergencies. The lock clicked. The heavy door creaked open, revealing shelves stacked with leather-bound ledgers, sealed envelopes, and small chests. The smell of aged parchment filled the air. Dust motes danced in the torchlight, like tiny ghosts of history. He moved carefully, scanning row after row, until a narrow cabinet drew his attention. Inside were documents labeled Private, Queen Eleanor, Final Correspondence, and family papers, confidential. He felt a pulse in his chest. This was it, the place where the unvarnished truth of her reign, her decisions, and, perhaps, the genesis of the will itself had been stored. One folder, bound in crimson leather and sealed with wax, stood out. The seal bore the Queen's insignia. Alaric reached for it, hesitant. His fingers trembled as he broke the wax. Inside, he found dozens of sheets of handwritten notes. Some were clearly drafts of speeches. Others were reflections, musings on duty, loyalty, and legacy. And then he saw it, a page that appeared to predate the will he already had. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's, yet the phrasing was rougher, more personal. Lines crossed out and rewritten, names added, then removed. It was chaotic, human, unlike the final version. Alaric realized he was holding the skeleton of her last decision, unpolished, raw, and, importantly, unfinished. "Look here," Harrington said, pointing to a section marked Grandchildren, Direct Entitlements. The notes listed every name, with detailed observations beside each. For Andrew, it read, "Choices threaten stability. Consider limits." For Harry, "Defiance growing. Needs containment." And for Meghan, "Outsider. Influence strong. Protect crown from public scandal." Alaric's stomach tightened. These were Eleanor's private judgments, written long before the final will was drafted. And the language, stark, unsparing, sometimes cold, matched the exclusions in the final document. Yet the inconsistencies he had noticed earlier made sense now. The final version was polished, absolute. This draft was personal, almost sentimental. Somewhere between this raw judgment and the sealed will, someone had shaped the words, ensured clarity, removed hesitation, and added weight. But who? Alaric flipped through the next few sheets. Handwritten marginalia appeared in a slightly different hand. Not Edward Young, not Lord Harrington. This hand was smaller, precise, methodical. The signature at the bottom read, AC, and Cunningham. The name alone made Alaric's heart pound. This was the advisor Harrington had mentioned, the mysterious figure who had vanished soon after Eleanor's passing. Someone had acted as a guardian of the final will, editing, clarifying, perhaps even influencing the decisions, all under the Queen's trust. Alaric felt a chill. Every decision he had assumed came from Eleanor herself now bore a shadow of doubt. Was it Eleanor's final judgment? Or had it been molded by the hidden hand of her confidant? Harrington leaned closer. "Your Majesty, the implications are vast. Whoever this AC is, she may have reshaped history." Alaric closed his eyes. He could see the corridors of power stretching endlessly before him. Advisors, aides, family members, all potentially complicit in this final act. The vault was meant to safeguard the monarchy's secrets, yet here, it had become a labyrinth, a maze where truth and manipulation intertwined. He rose, careful to leave the papers exactly as they were, knowing that disturbing them further might destroy evidence. He realized that this discovery was only the beginning. The vault held layers of decisions, compromises, and hidden communications, some of which had never been intended to reach a new king. And yet, the most dangerous revelation remained unseen. Alaric had noticed one envelope tucked behind the crimson folder, smaller, unmarked. He had not opened it yet. It was sealed in black wax, heavier than any other, untouched. Harrington watched him, sensing the tension. "That one, sire. It is said even the Queen herself never allowed anyone to read it until the appointed heir deems it necessary." Alaric stared at the envelope. A sense of dread and anticipation mixed inside him. Opening it could answer the questions gnawing at him for weeks. The truth about the exclusions, the influence of hidden hands, and the real reasons behind Eleanor's final decisions. But it could also unleash a storm, one that might unravel the family, tarnish the crown, and expose secrets the monarchy had safeguarded for centuries. He reached for it slowly. The wax crackled under his fingers. And as he lifted the flap, a single sheet fell free, revealing the first line in Eleanor's unmistakable hand. "If you are reading this, the time for truth has come." Alaric froze. The words seemed to echo through the stone vault, through the silent corridors above, through the very walls of the castle. Because what came next would change everything. Not just the inheritance, not just the monarchy, but the very legacy of Queen Eleanor herself. And as the candlelight flickered across the page, Alaric realized one terrifying fact. The vault did not just contain secrets. It contained power. Alaric stared at the single sheet in his hands. The words, written in Eleanor's flowing script, seemed impossibly heavy. Each letter carried the weight of decades, a lifetime of careful observation, of unspoken truths, of love and judgment interwoven in a single, final act. If you are reading this, the time for truth has come. The line alone sent a shiver down his spine. Eleanor had always been precise. She had never opened with drama, never made a statement without intent. The opening of this letter was deliberate, shocking, a warning, or perhaps a command. He glanced at Harrington. "Do you understand what this means?" Harrington's eyes were wide. "Sire, I've read many of her private notes over the years. Never like this. Never addressed to a living heir with such urgency." Alaric took a deep breath and began to read. The letter was deceptively simple at first, recounting her reflections on the crown, her service, and the trials she had endured. But then the tone shifted. Eleanor began to address specific family members. Her judgments were personal, meticulous, and unflinching. "Andrew," it read, "your choices have brought shame and scrutiny. The crown cannot subsidize mistakes born of your recklessness. You are loved, but you are not above the law of consequence." Alaric felt the chill return. Even in death, Eleanor's words carried authority, a mother's reprimand fused with a monarch's command. Then came the next line. "Henry and Mirabelle." The letter named them directly. "Your departure from duty and decorum has forced a reckoning. The privileges granted by birth must be tempered by accountability. The crown cannot reward defiance." The phrasing was unmistakable. The will's exclusions were not merely financial. They were symbolic, designed to strip influence, prestige, and recognition. The monarchy itself had to survive, Eleanor implied, even if it meant alienating her own children. Harrington broke the silence. "It's more than a will, sire. It's a verdict." Alaric's mind raced. The implications were staggering. Public revelation of this letter could ignite scandal. A family feud would erupt on an unprecedented scale. The press, already hungry for sensationalism, would descend like vultures. And yet, in Eleanor's mind, it was necessary. The letter continued, each paragraph sharper than the last. It referenced hidden advisors, trusted allies who had assisted her in ensuring the monarchy's survival. One name was familiar, and Cunningham. The others were obscure, almost anonymous, yet their influence was clear. Eleanor acknowledged that in her final months, guidance from these aides had been crucial to execute a vision of order from chaos. Alaric realized the Queen had anticipated dissent. She had planned contingencies. She had chosen the players, written the roles, and created the path for the monarchy to endure, with or without family approval. The most explosive revelation, however, came next. "Should any member of my family attempt to contest these provisions, know that I have left instructions with the archives. Original drafts, witness notes, and corroborating testimony. All will be released to the proper authorities to uphold my wishes. This is not threat, this is duty." Alaric's stomach dropped. The vault, the hidden drafts, the missing witness, all of it was part of a carefully constructed failsafe. The Queen had anticipated legal challenges. She had built a fortress around her intentions. But here was the real danger. The letter hinted at yet another layer, a secret even more consequential than the exclusions themselves. "I have preserved a single, final document," the letter concluded. "It contains truths that could topple reputations, reveal alliances, and expose betrayals. It is sealed until the heir deems it necessary to act, and it is the only measure that ensures the crown's preservation. Handle it wisely, for it is heavier than any crown." Alaric looked at Harrington, who had grown pale. "Heavier than any crown," he repeated, almost whispering. The implication was undeniable. There was a document, a secret, hidden somewhere, powerful enough to reshape the dynasty. And according to Eleanor, Alaric was the only one entrusted to reveal it, if ever. But the letter offered no clue as to its location. The vault had revealed many drafts, but not the final secret. Not yet. A creeping realization took hold. If the letter fell into the wrong hands, the monarchy could implode. Family, advisors, the press. Anyone with access could wield it as a weapon. Alaric felt the weight of Eleanor's trust pressing down on him. For the first time, being king was not ceremonial. It was a test of judgment, courage, and secrecy. Then came the knock. Soft, deliberate, echoing through the empty stone corridors of the vault. Harrington froze. Who? Alaric's hand instinctively went to the letter. Stay here, he whispered. The footsteps drew closer, slow and measured. Not hurried, not panicked, deliberate. Someone knew exactly where they were. And then the figure appeared in the doorway. A woman, tall, elegant, and unknown to the king, but radiating authority. Black attire, gloves, and a faint smile that suggested she belonged in shadows rather than sunlight. You have the letter, she said. Her voice was smooth, almost chilling. And you know what it contains. Alaric tightened his grip. Who are you? Someone who has ensured the crown's survival, she replied. Someone your mother trusted more than most. Harrington whispered urgently. Sire, be careful. The woman stepped closer, her gaze piercing. There is more than the letter. There is the hidden document your mother spoke of. And if you do not act quickly, others will find it first. Alaric felt the room tilt. He had prepared for challenges, for disputes, for public opinion. But he had not prepared for this. For a living guardian of secrets who had emerged from the shadows to test him. The woman's smile widened. The dynasty's survival depends on your choices tonight. Fail, and everything, your family, your crown, your history, could be lost. Harrington's hand rested on Alaric's arm. Sire, what do we do? Alaric's mind raced. Every instinct told him to hide, to secure the vault, to delay. But Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. Handle it wisely, for it is heavier than any crown. He straightened. Show me. The woman nodded, almost imperceptibly. Follow me. But remember, once the secrets leave this vault, nothing will ever be the same. As the three of them moved deeper into the labyrinth beneath the castle, Alaric understood a terrifying truth. The letter was only the beginning. The secret document, the one Eleanor had guarded even in death, waited ahead. And it would determine not just who inherited the crown, but who could ever claim loyalty, truth, and legacy in a family fractured by ambition, scandal, and betrayal. Above them, the castle's walls seemed to whisper, carrying the weight of centuries. Below, shadows shifted, concealing unknown dangers. The corridors of the palace had never felt colder. King Alaric moved through them with a purpose, the letter from Queen Eleanor clutched tightly in his hand. Shadows stretched along the stone walls, flickering with the torchlight, as if echoing the secrets that waited to be revealed. Family. The word had once been a source of pride for Alaric, a network of loyalty, tradition, and shared legacy. Now it felt like a labyrinth of betrayal. The revelations in Eleanor's letter had begun to unravel everything he thought he knew about his family. Andrew, Henry, and Mirabel. Their exclusion from the will had been deliberate, precise, and, apparently, inevitable. But the hidden layers beneath the final decisions hinted at something far more insidious. Someone had shaped Eleanor's final actions beyond her immediate judgment. Alaric summoned and Cunningham first. She had been his mother's confidant, the witness to the Balmoral meeting, and the person whose loyalty had never wavered, or so he had believed, and arrived promptly, her demeanor calm, almost indifferent. But her eyes betrayed tension. She knew why Alaric had called her. She had felt the weight of the secret long before he had. You know why I called you, Alaric said, without preamble, and nodded. I suspected. Do you understand the implications of the letter? I do. And I also understand the responsibility it places on you. Mother trusted you to act wisely. Act wisely. Alaric's voice was sharp. She trusted you to act wisely, didn't she? You were there in those final months. You signed her will. You oversaw the edits. You guided her decisions. Anne's expression didn't falter. I ensured her intentions were clear. That's all. Everything else, interpretation, implementation, that is yours, Alaric. Alaric's frustration surged. Do you realize what this looks like? That the exclusions, the secrecy, the manipulation, it could be perceived as betrayal? And leaned forward, her voice soft but unyielding. Perception is dangerous. You are king now. Your duty is to the crown, not the comfort of family sentiment. Mother made that clear. The room fell silent. Alaric realized the enormity of the challenge. His mother had anticipated family descent and had preemptively insulated her decisions. But the question remained, had she truly acted alone, or had the hidden advisor played a decisive role? He pressed further. And the letter mentions a secret document, the one that could topple reputations. You know where it is, don't you? Anne's gaze flickered briefly. I know of it, but Mother entrusted it to you. Only you. Anyone else seeking it risks destabilizing everything she built. Alaric felt a chill. The vault, the drafts, the letter, all had been meticulously designed as layers of protection. And now, he was the final gatekeeper. One misstep, one reveal, and the monarchy itself could fracture. He left the audience unsettled. His mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each more perilous than the last. Every family member was a potential threat, not maliciously, but inevitably. Andrew, embittered by exclusion. Henry and Mirabelle, disillusioned and defiant. And unwaveringly loyal yet cautious. And the hidden advisor, whose influence he still barely understood. That night, Alaric retreated to his private study. The letter lay before him, alongside the drafts from the vault. He pored over each name, each marginal note, each signature. Patterns emerged. Connections. Silent warnings. And then it struck him, a detail overlooked in the initial reading. Eleanor had included subtle instructions about public perception. Any challenge to the will had to be managed with precision, ensuring that the crown's image remained untarnished. She had anticipated the media storm, the family discord, and had left a blueprint for containment. But the letter's secrecy was a double-edged sword. While it protected the monarchy, it also fueled suspicion. The excluded family members would not remain silent forever. And Alaric knew, with a sinking certainty, that their response could be explosive. In the days that followed, messages began to arrive. Carefully worded notes, anonymous phone calls, and cryptic letters delivered to trusted aides. Someone, or several someones, knew about the vault, the letter, and possibly the hidden document. Alaric convened a private council, summoning and in Lord Harrington. They met in a dimly lit chamber, walls lined with portraits of ancestors who had weathered scandals and rebellions. Someone is probing the vault, Harrington reported. We've intercepted messages indicating an insider leak. They may know about the letter. Alaric's jaw tightened. Then we act first. We control the narrative. We decide who sees what and when. Everything else is speculation. Anne's eyes narrowed. And what of the family? You risk alienating them completely if you reveal too much. Alaric knew she was right. The delicate balance of loyalty, perception, and authority was under siege. Any misstep could spark public scandal, familial rebellion, or both. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. Andrew, embittered and angry, demanded an audience. He had heard whispers through the press, enough to know he had been excluded from the will. His sense of betrayal was palpable, his pride wounded. You can't do this, he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. Mother would never have treated me this way. This is... Alaric raised a hand. It is her will, Andrew. And it is final. Andrew's eyes blazed. Final? You mean your interpretation of her will? Who decided you could dictate what she wanted? You? And some hidden advisor? This is tyranny. And interjected calmly. Andrew, the Queen made her intentions clear. The exclusions were her decision, and it was deliberate. Not vengeance, not favoritism. Duty. Andrew's face twisted in disbelief. Duty? Duty to what? To her legacy? To you? You're tearing this family apart. Alaric's chest tightened. The confrontation was only the beginning. The excluded grandchildren, the advisors, the media, all were now threads in a dangerous web of secrecy, power, and revenge. Even as Andrew left in a storm of rage, Alaric knew this was not the end. He had glimpsed the fissures in the monarchy. Trust fractured. Loyalties questioned. Every move forward would be scrutinized, analyzed, and potentially weaponized. And then, late that evening, another message arrived. This one was different, handwritten, and signed with a single sentence. The hidden document is not what it seems. You must find it before they do. Alaric's heart pounded. The final piece of the puzzle, the document that Eleanor had described in the letter, was now at the center of a race not just for inheritance or reputation, but for the very survival of the crown. He understood now. The family was fractured, yes, But the true threat lay not in their anger or ambition, but in the unseen forces, the hidden hands that had shaped the Queen's final decisions, and the unknown individuals who now sought to exploit them. Alaric clenched his fists. He had a choice: to act cautiously, to protect the family at the expense of transparency, or to seek the hidden document, expose the truth, and risk the dynasty's stability. The corridors of the palace felt colder than ever. Outside, the wind howled against the ancient stone. Somewhere above, the world was oblivious to the storm brewing beneath its gilded roofs.